Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good half an hour break. We're now on to the fourth and final theme of the day. This theme is going to feature Steve Harding in conversation with the fellows and David Gillette from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And the theme is courses and curriculum. So in the rest of the day, we've been looking at how STEAM practice manifests itself in the makerspace sector. We've been looking at what creativity means across the arts and sciences. We've then looked at how STEAM can be applied to innovation and industry, and now we're looking at STEAM from an educational point of view, what it means within the context of universities, and I think people are going to talk a little bit how it touches on school education as well. But that's really enough from me. What I want to do is introduce the facilitator of the next session, Steve Harding, who is the coordinator of our STEAM Fellows program. So Steve, through the STEAM Fellows program, he's working to support academics as we move towards phase 2. He's had a long career with BCU, working on transnational projects that are focused on creative cities, economic development and policy development. And he's also been part of the urban manufacturing project, looking at how makerspaces can help catalyse innovation in city ecosystems. The STEAM Fellows programme is our attempt to create a network of transdisciplinary academics across the university, and the 3 that will be in conversation with Steve today are the first of 8, with the next 5 being appointed early in the coming academic year. So Steve, I think that's enough of an introduction from me. Over to you for your session in conversation with the STEAM Fellows.
Wonderful, thank you, Tom. If you could just put my first slide up, Laura.
Yeah, sure, I'll just find it.
And then just go with the flow. I just want to say what we're doing while we're waiting. Thanks for the intro, Tom.
A pleasure.
Hopefully we can see. Oh, it's appearing as, oh, good, the magic of technology. So if you can just go. Yeah, that's perfect. And then go to the next one, if you could. What I could do. Okay, so really what I wanted to do today, we just talk a little bit about, why we want STEAM Fellows, how the idea came about, and really something about creating a STEAM community in BCU. I think the idea of community and collaboration is really important. And we're then going to have 3 colleagues, Chico, Kush and Mark, to talk a little bit about their research and the influence that we hope on our curriculum in Birmingham. So it'll be a bit of a conversation to see how it goes, and then we'll take questions at the very end, and you can use the chat panel. I think everyone's been doing that really successfully during the day, and then Laura can help me and Tom can help me with some of the questions we'll take at the end of the session. So next one. Yeah, I think you've all seen the slides of what we're trying to do in terms of phase 1 Digbeth and phase 2. I think it's important for me to say, I think the first phase was very much around how industry interacts with the STEAM ideas. And we've had a very strong focus on SMEs. And I think that's where our cross-collaboration work came from. And it's interesting because we're going to have David Gillette and quite a few from California later. They started from the student perspective. So we're going in a little bit of a reverse engineering way. So our next big change is going to be around the curriculum and how we can look at some of the cross-disciplinary working in the actual STEAM campus. So we did some very nice shots of, oh, these are the days when you could get in a plane, guys. Do you remember those days where you could travel? Hopefully we'll have those days again. But anyway, we did quite a lot of benchmarking in the States for their work in STEAM. I think it's really important to kind of look at where is best practice in the world. and we were very well received. These slides are all from our stay in San Francisco and Los Angeles, although we'd also done another study visit in 2016 to New York as well. I think STEAM education in the States is incredibly important for them, and this notion of working, giving all their students the analytical and the critical thinking and the creative skills, I think, is a key part, as what they would say is the next kind of the new graduate, if you like, that's going to emerge in the next few years. The next one. Yeah. So why did we do? Why did we have STEAM Fellows? We think it's important to actually give people the responsibility and the confidence and a role to help some of these things happen. I think when you're looking at change, you need people who are going to act as catalysts and as facilitators, as role models, and actually as experimenters as well. People who are on the edge of what they do and are well thought of. So I think we always wanted this as a notion of how we do this in our university. So we put out an open call, and the three colleagues we'll see later, well, straight away actually, will our first three successful STEAM Fellows. And they were the process involved a cross-faculty assessment panel, and each of the STEAM Fellows will have some development resources to work on the project, and they're going to be talking about their projects in the next few minutes. So yeah, so what we're aiming for, and you'll see there, there's a little note from the Jacobs Institute in Berkeley. Is to look at transdisciplinary thinking. So how can we actually, by combining the arts and science, create new concepts, new ways of thinking, not just at the edges of the disciplines, but in the fundamental part of the discipline, if you like. So we felt that one way of doing this is to help us with developing project ideas. And colleagues are now going to talk about three fantastic ideas, and they're going to give a brief overview of each one, and then I'll have a couple of questions for them, just to maybe bring out a few more issues that they would like to. And then, as I said, at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A. Okay, so without further ado, can we introduce Chico? I know he's there.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Can you talk us through your ideas to rethinking the violin bow?
Yeah, so hi from me, and thank you for having me here. The project that I propose is rethinking the violin bow, and is in collaboration with Roberto Alonso from Hong Kong Baptist University. He's a professional violin player. So we had a discussion about this idea, and this was something that was missing from as a violin player in terms of education and how you can educate violin players. If we can go to the next slide. So yeah, this is me on the left. I'm a lecturer in digital media technology at the DMT lab at the School of Computing and Digital Technology. And as I said, Roberto is an assistant professor in string performance at the Department of Music at the Baptist Hong Kong University. So what was challenging for us is to come up with some sort of an interesting idea which would not be obscuring for the performer. And as you can see, there's been previous attempts in terms of how you can make a violin bow. But as you can see from the pictures, all of those approaches that are more or less too big for the violin player to adapt. They were very heavy, bulky, and it was somehow you required the person that developed the bow to be there in order to run the program. So what we're thinking is to create some sort of a version that is easy for any violin player to adapt to use it and play with. So we're trying to kind of looking from the design perspective, from the software perspective, and yeah, it's a kind of a all-around approach. Come to the next session. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is basically redesign the frog. The frog of the violin of the bow is as you can see on the left-hand side, is the black item on the bow. What we're thinking is to include the electronics, so all the sensor technologies to go in the bow and track the movement of the bow as the player plays along. So we need to come up with some sort of a new design, let's say, in order to fit the electronics, to fit the battery and host everything in there, and also try to make it as light as possible so that there is no distraction in terms of the weight of the bow. As I said before, this is kind of thinking in progress. So why we want to do that is to create new electronic interactive music performances, as well as new original electroacoustic compositions, provide innovative methods of teaching violin through gesture data analysis, and create a bow that feels and looks the same as a standard bow, make it accessible to everybody, and if possible to have it as cost efficient as possible through a 3D print. So the idea is to somebody can, let's say, get the frog and insert it to its own bow and use it straight away. And when we say provide innovative methods of teaching violin, we could do it through the software and through the data. We can have, let's say, a database where we can capture and understand how a professional violin player plays a particular piece, and then the data from the bow would present the student how it should be played, or what will be the best approach to play that particular piece. In order to do that, we're going to commission a composition student from the Birmingham Conservatory to write a piece. Also test it with a professional violinist and have an open call throughout and see who is interested. And if you think this is something that you might be interested, please give me a call on my email. I'll be happy to have a discussion.
Thanks, Tico. It's a complex project you run through really clearly and described it really well. Maybe just a nice question to begin with. What's gone well with this collaboration? What kind of things have happened that you've been really pleased by?
Which collaboration?
I'm here, Tico, if you want.
With you mean with Roberto? You mean? Yeah. So Roberto and I. Roberto is a professional violin player, and he's the one that introduced me to this idea that there is an issue with education, basically, in terms of how how a violin player learns to play the violin, and it's not an easy way to understand if there is an issue, because most of the times you might go and practice a piece, but you might practice it wrong. So you could spend hours and hours on practicing the piece, let's say in a wrong position, or if you want to get the intonation or the accent right, then it's something that the software, we believe, can easily provide.
I think Roberto's
Yes.
with us as well, isn't he? Did you want to chip in, Roberto, and add to that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Hello, everyone. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. As Tigran said, I guess the idea, it's to put it simply, is to transform through an approach to human-machine interaction that is transparent, the way we relate to the instrument. So that sense of not being able to see or feel that you're working with technology, but the technology actually being there is what is going to make a huge difference, I believe. And that's, I think, the core of what we're trying to do, which has different implications, I think.
So there are a lot of challenges in that sense. So in order to get the weight of the bow right, that's a huge challenge. So we try already a few 3D design approaches where we took off the inside of the frog and tried to insert the electronics and tried to get the balance right and try to make
it's hard.
Yeah, and as Roberto said, trying to make it as transparent as possible so that it's not the everyday violin player will not see it as something extra that he has to learn to play the violin with electronics, but it's the same as it is. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Chico,
violin playing.
Roberto, still that? Can I?
Sorry.
Maybe we've got a couple of minutes, and then we better move on to Kush in terms of the program. But yeah, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say that as violinists, I mean, I do a bunch of other things, but we work with an instrument that has been the same for 500 years and a bow that has been the same for 200 years since Turut and Kramer and stuff. So people are not willing to change their instruments. They learn to play this, and it takes such an effort. So the only way we can transform their relationship with this instrument is by changing the inside part of the instruments, so that they don't have to learn a new instrument or a new bow. They can use the normal bow, but the bow has its inner life, and we can make magic with that.
It's different from them. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you both. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at the end of this Q&A. But thank you, Chico, and also Roberto for talking about this project, and you'll see more of that later. Kush, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you really well.
Great.
So Kush is from 500-year-old practice. We're going to talk about something really contemporary now in terms of a topic. So I'll hand it over to you, Kush, and then we'll have a little chat about some of the issues that you're uncovering. So Kush.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. First of all, it was an absolute privilege to be selected as one of the first STEAM fellows, and to sort of give me an opportunity to think about a field that I've sort of been really engaged with a long time, which is essentially community-based research. And a part of my life within that has been around, researching or training or being a practitioner around what we now call hate crime. When I started in that field, we used to talk in terms of racial harassment. When I had this opportunity, I started thinking in terms of narrative, and that is a sort of a real buzzword at the moment. We could say storytelling, for example, and how can we actually begin to think about countering hate narratives through what I sort of referred to as art sociology, tech, and then evidence. And they were connecting sort of different projects that I was involved in. So connecting sort of like community engagement and knowledge exchange with a particular subject matter. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to, can you move them? Thank you. The problem, I think, that I was sort of trying to present was that we have this policy at government level, and this is in the UK, that sort of describes hate crime as harmful. It highlights the victims suffer repeat victimization, and very well documented now in terms around serious psychological harm, and then there are impacts that stretch into communities and then within and across communities. And if we just take very quickly the figures around so I'm offering evidence, first of all. The evidence in terms of numbers, in 2018-19, there were about 103,000 what we call hate crimes recorded by the police in England and Wales. And that has pretty much doubled since 2014-15. In the UK, hate crime cuts across various strands, as it's listed there: disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender. And then also, and that figure above is offline, so in the world we inhabit, in a sense. But hate narratives are also circulated very widely through, as we know, new technology, and online hate is increasing. And often offline hate spikes after trigger events, for example, terror attack, or even COVID. COVID has led to an increase in hate crime, both online and offline. The issue partly also then is that research tends to highlight that victims or people generally actually don't know what a hate crime is. So you can go off and do a focus group as a researcher or whatever, and then you're really explaining what this thing is called hate crime. And it sort of begins to then beg the question how that is understood out there in communities. And often practitioners struggle with identifying there's a huge amount of research that's done around this area. And if you're a practitioner, so I'm working with housing practitioners at the moment, they really struggle to get core messages from research and good practice. On the right-hand side is just an example of, again, a UK-wide sort of online resource. This is operated by the police nationally. They did have an app attached to this, and my understanding is the app isn't operational. But if you went into this, for example, a person could report online, and there's a huge amount of information around hate crime generally. So, and there are some apps out there, in a sense. Next slide, please. So the problem is, in a sense, clear. There's evidence. There are victims. There are policies. There are responses. What I was interested in doing, and potentially had the opportunity when this came along, was to think of it and begin to think of it slightly differently. And so I thought, in terms of a feasibility study, to develop what I'm sort of calling an art sociology tech response that leads to an evidence-based, usable online resource, taking what I'm sort of referring to as a knowledge exchange and a community engagement approach. And so I have some sort of guiding questions. We're in Birmingham, UK, so I'm thinking Birmingham, but ultimately it's broader, as you can imagine. And thinking in terms of the UK, well, how does prejudice and hate violence affect the lives of people in Birmingham? And what can we then do with that information through taking an art sociology sort of premise or a lens? What can we learn, for example, from the recent Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 pandemic? What is that telling us? And how then do we combine evidence? So, for example, at the moment, I'm scoping apps at the moment so that I can have an informed conversation with colleagues around how do we then combine evidence, art sociology and tech to create a platform where hate or anti-racism can be shared to support, transform the experience and influence wider change. The two images there, in a sense, are contrasting. There's one there which simply is a Muslim woman who's just expressing herself, and that's sort of what I'm talking about in terms of art sociology, is the very broadly encompassed way of looking at the world. And I was sort of guided by a professor of sociology back in the 1950s. He was an Indian sociologist, and he defined art as the autobiography of society. And I really liked that, and it sort of made sense for me, because I collect stories of people, when they talk about their experiences. So I wanted to see how we can utilize those issues and stories into some sort of tech-based sort of platform. Next slide, please. So within that, I then created this approach, and I'm very much at the scoping end of this, very, very much. And I've created myself a sort of an acronym called SECTOR. So I'm scoping at the moment, and you can see this, the slide goes right to left. And just looking at what tools and resources are there at the moment, and what do we know about, for example, apps or online resources dealing around challenging hate narratives and / even anti-racism, given the current language as well we're using. How we then, another part of my approach would be about how we engage with communities of interest, practitioners, policymakers, but also being part of the STEAM Fellow internally within the institution, within the different sort of departments and faculties. What evidence, knowledge, expertise do we have, particularly keen, around art, and particularly around textual as well. If I just say, many years ago, somebody gave me a poem that they wrote after their experience. I still have the poem. It's not something we ever published, but people talk and write about their experiences in all sorts of ways: photography, poem, diary, all sorts of ways. Can we utilize that in some way? Very quickly, so engage would be my next up, and then we've gone forward. We engage. Then I'm looking to collaborate in terms of with a small scale sort of community-based project, looking at the sorts of ways people are talking about this through an art focus, testing, sort of developing an actual sort of proof of concept, and actually thinking about where can we get grant applications from, potentially beginning to pilot, operationalize that through the pilot, begin to disseminate some of the learning. And then my R is simply the loop, is to learn, refine and evaluate, and so it goes. So very early days, but I am at the scoping stage and really looking forward to sort of developing this, and potentially this time next year actually being able to show you something tangible that we've achieved. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kush. And I think it also links really well into BCU's mission, doesn't it? It's a STEAM project linking very much into the core of what the university is about. I mean, do you see some of the methods that we hope to use rubbing off onto our undergrads and our postgrads in terms of how they approach the world?
Well, I think so. And I think, there's a very clear relationship for our students, because so many of our students, for example, come from within Birmingham. So they come with knowledge and experience of some of these issues. We also know broadly across the university sector, hate crime, particularly now racial harassment, is an issue that, we're talking about more and gathering more evidence. But yes, certainly, I mean, one of the projects I'm running is something called Birmingham 2029, which is our university community sort of engagement offer. And that very clearly connects with our students in terms of how we can expand and build on their skills. So I would be looking to work directly with students in terms of, their links in Birmingham and through Birmingham to sort of develop this project. But yeah, it has wide appeal in that sense. Yeah,
it really does, and it seems very much a STEAM approach to what is really a societal issue, which is very important as we move on in these post-COVID times, I think. Thank you.
It's a core societal issue.
It's a core thing, I think, and I think a STEAM approach. It's good that we can have this sort of thinking that will enable us to, I think, shed new knowledge, new techniques. And for me, I think it also engages with students in our communities really in a very profound way. So I'm thanks for your explanation this afternoon.
Thank you.
And I'm sure there's going to be, I can see there's questions already for both you and Tico on the chat button. But before we go there, Mark, can I introduce Mark Brill?
Hello.
Just give us a little view of the One Pixel project, Mark, and what you're a bit of an old hand with some of this stuff. So it'd be nice if you could just talk about this and maybe the context of some of the other things you've done in STEAM. So over to you.
Yeah, and actually, and again, like Kush, I mean, I'm really honoured to be here. This was meant to be at the point where, this project kind of encapsulates to me in a very small way a range of different things that we've been working on for a number of years. So at this point, I now get to say, next slide, please. You see, and I have a picture of a slide. I only put it in there just so I could make that joke. However, the slide also represents for me, now we'll go back one, just about the playfulness of what we're trying to do. It was interesting looking at the word cloud that we did earlier, because absolutely things like collaboration, inclusivity, diversity, creativity are all part of this. But also when you're innovating, it's kind of about having fun. It's being playful. And as much as anything else, in order to be creative and innovate, you have to take a risk. You have to be prepared to let go, hence the slide. So next slide is not a slide. It's this. So I guess the culmination of some of the work that we've been doing, so things around Maker Monday, which some of you heard earlier, but also for the last couple of years, we've been piloting a project that's now become this new Masters. I'll just hit the return.
Mark, you're muted.
How strange. I think I was not muted. Sorry, just coming back to this, I'm not sure which bits you heard or didn't hear, but essentially this MA is kind of the culmination of what we've been doing over the last, I think it's about 6 or 7 years, both with the sort of multidisciplinary work we're doing at Maker Monday, but also a pilot that we ran last year in terms of collaboration across many different disciplines. But I think for me, the thing that makes innovation is the creativity. And so if we do go to the next slide, I guess for me, it's always about kind of thinking about problems and how we creatively solve these. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is about complexity in the world. And that actually very often technological innovation doesn't necessarily make life simpler. It makes it more complex. Ask anyone who's having to manage teams today, and I think they'll agree with me on that particular point. But think about your own life. Think about what you do when you get up in the morning. What's the first thing? You probably reach over and look at your phone. Maybe you go and check the weather, and then you start seeing some messages, a couple of emails, you know, have you got the slides ready for today, that kind of thing, and you get caught in this sort of whole kind of trap around notifications. So I thought, well, what if we take the notifications out away from the screen and start embedding it in the object? But the idea is to actually, again, take away the complexity. So it's a simple binary. It's just an on or off. So this is a coat hanger. And you put it on the back of the door, you put your raincoat on it. By the way, if anybody wants to spot the label, that is from my uncle's and grandfather's tailoring business. I didn't just make that up. But the idea is simply this. If it's going to rain that day, the light comes on the coat hanger. And that is all it does. And yet it can take you away from being tied to your phone. So if we go to the next slide. So the idea about the coat hanger is this concept of a 1-pixel interface, the 1-pixel project. So this will be the next iteration of it. So it's going to look much neater, much smarter. And the nice thing about this is we can work with the team at STEAMhouse to develop this. We've already discussed how we might actually put this into practice. And if it works well, we'll then put it onto some kind of crowdfunding and see where it goes. So this is the idea behind the 1-pixel project. That's one object. But what else could we do? And I think there's a whole range of things where we can embed a simple notification in the object. Imagine the pill box, the pill case that you just put in your pocket and it's going to vibrate when you need to take your medication, or the bookmark that makes a little chirp because you haven't read your book for a few weeks and you've ignored it, or the plant pot that's going to glow when you want to water it. Now, these are all notifications, but there may be many, many other things we do. So if we just go on to the next slide. The idea behind this project is the simple 1-pixel interface. So a pixel, it could be a light, it could be a sound, it could be a vibration. But what else could we do? So we're going to have an open call, and the idea is to bring in essentially anyone. I want this to make this as multidisciplinary as possible. And we just want the idea. What could we do? What could we make? And we're going to try and collaborate together. So if it's your idea, you know, we want you to come and help us actually build the thing with the help of our technicians and our expertise. But what could we do? And again, if any of these work, why don't we just take them all onto crowdfunding and see if they become an enterprise? But what we will be able to do is hopefully create a kind of, you know, a portfolio, group of objects that we can show as good examples of innovation that then link back into the courses that we're doing. I think that's all I have to say at this point, Steve.
That's really good. Very clear and succinct, Mark. And as you are forgiven the slide joke.
I just wanted to do 5 pictures of different slides.
You should have done. You should have done that.
You dared me, and I didn't quite manage.
So as I see it, this could be a really good way of getting small companies involved in what STEAMhouse does, because it's a simple concept, and you're going to put it out there and say, in the One Pixel project, you know, come and talk to us. I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and the interesting thing I should say, I mean, this is incredibly broad. I mean, I absolutely want this to be, definitely I would like some student input, but it's also about students and enterprise, and it is anybody literally who has an idea. And one of the things I should say, I mean, my examples are all around notifications, but there are probably things in either aimed at specific audiences, health sector specific applications that I haven't thought about, that somebody can come back and make a suggestion. I could even see a connection going back to things like the bow, for example, as to where you could do that. So, yeah, absolutely. I want to hear from everyone. We'll announce the call out properly, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what I'd like to say to all of us now, have I got all of you back, Kush, and have I got Tico there?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a few comments on how we see, because we've got the projects we want to develop over the next year or so. I mean, I guess there's going to be some advantages for using like online technology with some of this stuff, but just your thought on how we could use technology to do STEAM projects in these times when actual physical meetings might be more difficult. I think that would be a useful thing to say, because you know, we started this idea some months ago, and now we're in a different scenario. So, early thoughts on that?
I think from my point of view, COVID's changed everything from a sort of a sociology, social scientist type point of view. You know, we are having to do far more, as you know, online, and using all sorts of tools and learning about all sorts of tools. So for me, it raises all sorts of questions going into this work in the next few months in terms of how I will be engaging with, as I pointed out, my schema communities of interest. And I'll be as much guided by people, hopefully, who will get in touch with me through this process as others. But yeah, it's changed everything in terms of how we're having to, for me, from the community engagement aspect of it. At the moment, it will be online.
A chat on the chat, people asking about, you know, maybe potential partners such as West Midlands Police, have they got a view on this, and potentially we might find it easier to get some of the larger stakeholders engaged because of the time, and you know, there's always an issue. Getting them engaged online might be actually a more effective way now.
That's correct, I think. Yes.
You might find. And I think, Tico, and I mean, in terms of your projects and the violin bow, how do you feel that is going to be affected by the corona issue that we have at the moment?
It's actually an opportunity, because the idea is that that you can practice with the bow, and you can send the data to your teacher, and the teacher can visualize, in a sense, what you play, or even play back the data, and he or she can see where you have gone wrong and what are you missing from the whole performance. So in a sense, I could say that this is an opportunity to get this remote teaching to the next level in that sense.
So it could be a good way. I think I'll open it up now to others who are joining us online. Are there any other questions for Tico, Kush, and Mark from you guys?
Steve, I think Sophia had a question.
Yes, she did. Sophia?
If you unmute, Sophia, you can ask the question
yes,
to the.
I saw I had a couple, so I'm just. This one was for Kush, actually. It was just saying that you've taken a very interesting approach to your research. But I said, do you think that the government policies have a firm grip on hate crime?
There's some level of grip. I mean, there's been policies in place for a while. I think The issue really is in what's going on online in some senses, because it's unquantifiable in some senses in terms of what we call hate crime or hate speech, you know, and how that might be impacting on people who are then experiencing it through this medium and what they do with it. I think if we were looking at that aspect of it, I'd say that I think most actors, organisations don't have a grip on it. We're certainly not doing enough around that. Offline, there's much more awareness, as people know. You know, so there's most local authorities, organisations have some sort of policy in response to it. But resources is a huge issue, i.e. victim support, supporting people.
Thank you.
Steve, there is a question from one of our external participants, RM Calloway.
Yes.
It's how to the fellows how to measure the success of STEAM projects, particularly beyond commercial success. And Steve, you may have something to say to this as well, having helped design the program in the first place. But how do we measure the success of STEAM projects?
I think it's a really in a way a deep question. I see the project as a way of it's almost like a window or a lens to other changes in a way. And so the project is a focused way of enabling people to collaborate on common areas. So the project itself has got to have some success criteria, but then almost more importantly, the collaboration aspects of the project are the ones that are more profound, because what we should do through the project is get behavioural change, and that we enable colleagues to see things differently, and to see their own colleagues differently, maybe, and to open up boundaries of thinking. So for me, you know, a project is a way of doing that. So I think that'll be my view on that one, Tom. I don't know if the others would want to comment on the project. Maybe Mark, have a think about that one, because you've done a lot for Maker Monday, to quite specific things, which I think have had quite profound benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I've always wanted to do things in which there is, I talk about some kind of legacy, but I particularly like the idea of actually producing stuff, making stuff, because this is the area that we're involved with. So I guess if I'm looking at my project, actually making, I mean, the commercial success side of it is just a bit of experimentation to see what happens. The real success for me is actually is the successful making. But even then, and I think, you know, I look at something like Maker Monday, you don't always know where it's going to go. We haven't done as much making prototyping as I expected, but on the other hand, we have a really strong community of practice that I never saw coming. And when we look back at what we've done, we've built a really strong community that way. So I think, you know, sometimes you shouldn't be too stuck with a particular measure of success.
I think we've just had a comment in from Prem Kumar from India, and I think that really builds on what we've just said. So STEAM is looking at cultural change really as well as you know, changes in sort of a particular project application for sure. And I think some of those changes are really important. And I think we're here. I think David, our keynote at the end of this, will talk about that from his experience of Cal Poly, and how you bring together the arts and the engineering community in a very profound way over time. And really get some new thinking and insights. I don't know, Kush, if you want to add anything on that in terms of your approach to sociology and to new ways of looking at the world.
Yeah, I think for me it's about how we're better connecting with, I think it was Mark just talked about communities of practice. So I will have a particular community of practice, or communities actually as they are. And how do we, as a sort of like an intellectual drive or as an anchor institution, connect with those? And for me, this is one way of doing this. In terms of its sort of commercial viability and how we measure that, for example, for me, this would be, depending what is the tool that we create, and I guess we'll be having these conversations next year, it'd be about how well is it used and what does it change as a consequence at the interpersonal and potentially the systemic. So is there a policy change, for example, that occurs through what's happening through the process?
Okay.
But I think,
Well,
go on. I think it reinforces the kind of the role of the university as a change agent, and how we, through STEAM, will look at how we new perceptions of the world, and for sure, I think some of the STEAM projects will result in commercial things that people would like to buy, or new approaches to pedagogy and new approaches to research practice. But I think it's a much wider thing, as I think you three have demonstrated today. It's going to be a really interesting, really good experience the next few months as we go on into 2021. Tom, I think we're approaching time now, so
I think that's your slot. Yeah. So thank you very much, Steve.
Can I thank?
Yeah.
Well, firstly, thank people for tuning into this. It's been a long day, so much appreciate your interest in this, and of course, thank Tico, Kush, and Mark for being really on point and giving really succinct and well thought through demonstrations of what they're going to do in STEAM. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Thanks to the fellows.